So I'm Brenda Boltwood. I'm a senior vice president and part of MetricStream's leadership team. I work with large accounts globally. Before joining MetricStream, I was a customer when I was the chief risk officer at Constellation Energy. Before that, I was with JP Morgan in various risk and compliance roles, even a business role at one time. Before that with Bank One, a number of other financial institutions. So about 25 years in risk and compliance, and very privileged to say the last 6 at MetricStream working with companies like Fannie Mae. And so Peter Bannister joins us on this in this discussion. And Peter runs the GRC RiskWorks program office for Fannie Mae. And I just wanted Peter to spend a moment introducing yourself, but also, you know, what brought you in your career to something new, like running a GRC program office, and, you know, kind of what's your experience from a career perspective, right? If you could just help give the audience that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure what my experience is that got me here, but I'll give it my best shot.
Good.
So yeah, Peter Bannister. I work at Fannie Mae, and as Brenda said, I run the GRC program, which she said we've actually branded internally as the RiskWorks program. Yeah, my career twists and turns throughout. I've worked in London, the Isle of Man. I've done data analytics, reporting, risk, pricing. But I think the common thread throughout has been change. Everything I have done has always been changing or automating or making things more efficient, which I think is how I ended up with GRC as a full-time role. This, by a long way, is the most complex and most difficult change to date. But I guess that's a good thing.
I think it's a good thing, too. And, you know, on top of this large, complex program that you're running, I have to say, I take my hat off to you every time I see you, honestly, just because I know you're managing a big change program at home with recent twins.
Yep.
And, you know, how many kids under 5 years old? So
there's 4 under 5.
4 under 5. So, you know, our hat's off to you. And probably maybe even easier than GRC, I'm not sure, but you know, it has its challenges.
Different challenges, yeah. Both unknown paths ahead.
Okay, good. So if you meet up with Peter, it's an interesting conversation. So, but you know, Peter and I have had some discussions about our talk, you know, today at the summit, and we wanted to cover off on a few items. The first was just, you know, having Peter talk about what it has been at Fannie Mae to set up a GRC program office. You know, for all companies, GRC starts off, or it has started off with it feels like it's a choice of technology, and sometimes it's about a specific policy management application or something in risk management. And then not long after, you know, the technology choice, you realize, wow, this is a lot more complicated. There's a whole program involved. So we'll talk about things like executive sponsorship, you know, marketing of that, you know, program, you know, in your organization structure. And tomorrow we're privileged that some people from your organization we're gonna be on a different panel talking in a little more detail about your objectives. But then we're gonna talk about what your program does for end user adoption, you know, and how you're tackling that challenge. Then we're going to talk about the culture changes. So as you've brought GRC program strategy, you know, what have been the culture changes that have been required, and what are you working on? And then the fourth thing, we're just going to talk about success stories. So how do we know the GRC program is really working and taking hold? What can we point to? So let's go to the...
And we did agree ahead of time, because this is the graveyard shift, and the last thing between you guys and the wine next door. I see a nod here. We do want to make this interactive, so just jump in at any time with questions, because otherwise we'll just talk.
Otherwise, it's, you don't want to hear us the whole time, right? So, and we promise to give you the mic that actually allows people to hear your question. But, you know, feel free to raise your hands. I've got colleagues here that will pick up your questions. So, Peter, let's just talk a little bit about the GRC program program at Fannie Mae, like, after choosing a vendor, and you guys had GRC in silos, you could say, at Fannie Mae, and then the decision was made to bring it together in one enterprise GRC system. And was that kind of decision-making a precursor to setting up the program office, or, what spawned it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a long journey to get here, and you mentioned several different technologies. We still have several different technologies for our GRC. We've had GRC for some time, but it's, to your point, been in different departments, different silos, different technologies. They don't talk to each other, really inefficient process. But nevertheless, we have been compliant, but it's just been a really difficult sort of path to get there. In terms of the GRC program office, the state we are in today with my team who's here today, that's been a long journey as well. I mean, when I first got involved, I was really only responsible for the technology portion.
Right.
We obviously ran the tool selection, selected MetricStream. But only then, I think, to your point, we got policy management up and running and case management, which were really relatively ring-fenced in terms of buy-in and agreement and standardization. Only when we really started to hit issue management, risk management, and eventually we'll get to testing, did we realize the scale of the task ahead in terms of what we needed from a governance perspective.
Right.
So the reason I mentioned that is that we had then groups of people. We had a group of individuals called a Tiger team, who selected the risk framework, the COSO framework that we would align behind. And then we had a team of sort of 3 other VPs who were leading that team. I was leading the technology over here, and ironically, our own GRC program was disparate and non-standard and not talking to each other. And then,
right.
Anyway, so eventually, yes, we brought everything under one roof, under the GRC role, and partnered with our colleagues in risk governance. And I think you mentioned earlier, I think it was me you were talking about, the technology is only 10% of what we think about. Everything else, from a governance perspective, a change perspective, a communications and training perspective, that's the rest of it, and that's the really hard stuff. We've recently launched an issue management reporting solution, which is backed up by the MetricStream data. We use another platform to provide the dashboards. But that's the first time we've actually pushed a product out to completion,
right?
Which is amazing. But it's then the training, the communication, the change on top of that, which is what we focus on. So technology is, I think you talk about it, is the enabling solution, but
right.
Without everything else ahead of that, very, very difficult to make progress.
But I'll be the first to say, as a metric streamer, that Tableau kind of output that's been created as an issue management kind of real-time, go see the status of your business actions, and where you've had closure, what's open, what's ultimately going to be reported to the board. It's very impressive, right? Coming from a consistent source.
It's fun. I mean, we've never had at Fannie Mae. I mean, certainly we used to. Well, we send a very large, very thorough report to the board of directors on a thrice yearly basis. It's called the Integrated Controls Report, and that used to take a village to put together. And Judy will attest to that as the owner of that report. Now we effectively have the same information on a daily basis.
Right.
So we've gone from 3 times a year. It's not quite as simple as that, but to a daily report where you can go and drill and analyze your own information as a business owner or process owner, and see the state of the sort of risk and control environment. So it's a massive step forward. Lots more to do in terms of the rest of it, the process risk and controls, but certainly a good first step.
Yep. So let's step back and, if we had an org chart up here and, we were talking about your GRC program office, can you talk about its components and why you focused resources in the areas you have? Yeah,
absolutely. And they're all here at the front. So, so I think we'll start with Margaret. I mean, that makes most sense. So Margaret is in charge of the MetricStream platform. She's what we call the product owner. It's an agile term that we use. So she is all things MetricStream, getting it implemented, standing up M7, getting the requirements, getting the defects resolved, and so on and so forth. And then we have Judy, who's in charge of the data. So the taxonomies, the risk control matrices, the issue data, some of the issue reporting, the dashboarding we just talked about, that's her space. And then Nancy, who is operations. So she's making sure the data quality is good. She's doing all the access requests.
Yep.
We have a help desk for all things RiskWorks, all things GRC. She mans that. We have Lizzie, who's project manager for the program, all the administrative budgets, business case, corporate reporting, that type of stuff. And then Michael, who leads the change management piece, which is probably the most understaffed and yet the hardest component of the program. But I will say that was the intent, to have almost your tech, data, operations, change, and sort of PM across the top.
Right.
But it wasn't always that way. We've evolved, and we're now putting more and more resources into Judy and Michael's teams to give them, to give change and data the attention it needs. And that's just evolved through time as we've matured and we've rolled out new information, new apps.
Right.
But yeah, it's ever changing.
Okay, so, part of setting up this program office, you had to establish a budget, you had to get buy-in, all the way up to the board. Can you talk about, how does the board of directors see the GRC program, right? And, what are they expecting? And then, how do employees of Fannie Mae see the GRC program? So just top down and bottoms up. What are they?
Yeah, and I smirk because I was in the boardroom in March, and I'll tell you a funny story. One of the, as I was sort of giving an update on the program, where we were, achievements, pitfalls and risks, and one of the guys, I forget which one, or I choose to forget for today which one it was. He said, "Yeah, we had a GRC program at X investment bank. That it was its program name was Falcon." But its nickname was Pigeon because it was flying around all over the place and leaving a mess everywhere and so on. So there was levity in the room with a serious message, which was, we really want this,
Falcon and
but we understand how difficult it is and how many firms don't achieve it. So we do have good buy-in in the boardroom. We do have a board who understands the difficulty, and a different board member was pinging me on change management. What's the change management? What are you doing for change? So they are very aware of what they want and the struggles, which is fantastic. So we have a very engaged board, a very engaged management committee, of course, as well. And then I would argue that probably the 1.5th line of defense, those in business risk teams, the second line and the third line, all have a very good understanding of the program. Not all, but for the large part, all very good understanding of the program, the value. Where we've yet to penetrate is the true first line process owner, risk owner, and I think it was an MSIG earlier, I think it was Susan and yourself. She made a really good observation that MetricStream wasn't built for the first line, it was built for the second and third line. I was like, wow, okay, so, and she, talking about different technologies you might layer on top, and I was thinking, well, that's the same with our governance, and the same with the way we pull things. They're built by second line and third line, for second line and third line. So no wonder we're struggling with adoption. And Nancy earlier made a comment that maybe some of our governance could be, just dialed back a bit to help gain traction. So I think we are getting in our own way, for certain perspectives, as it comes to. Why isn't the first line bought in? Well, I think it's actually things we've done unconsciously with our second and third line bias that we haven't even thought of before. So I've certainly taken something away from the conference already. So
that's great. No, that's good to hear. So let's talk about the first line. The second topic we were going to discuss was about end user adoption. And like you said, you've kind of focused on that 1.5 line of defense. So those risk and compliance teams in the business, they hard line into the business head, but yet have an appreciation for what we're trying to achieve in risk and compliance. So can you talk about how you've driven acceptance of that organization and the role they play in the first line?
Yeah, and so just to give some brief context, a lot of the sort of in-business risk teams were originally second line, and as we talk about, the lines of defense, some years ago the decision was made, well, we need a stronger risk presence in the first line, and the easiest way to do that is to lift and shift from the second line. So we pushed second line folks down into the first line. They became these in-business risk folks. So they do have the skills necessary to sort of, as it turns out, translate what we're trying to do with RiskWorks into first line and help them with that buy-in. We've also built out the pods, the RiskWorks pods, and Michael leads this. And these are 8 groups of about 10 people, and these 10 people are division specific. So, for example, we'll have a single family business pod, a multi-family business pod, a finance pod, and these pods are made up of 1.5 second and third line people. And the idea is they are driving adoption in their division because they know their division. Like Michael and I sat where we know RiskWorks, we don't know how RiskWorks is going to affect those divisions. So the idea was to sort of have a hub and spoke model where we push out centralized training, governance, technology, job aids, helpful videos, whatever it is, a website, and then those pods take it and run with it deeper into the belly of the first line.
So it sounds almost like they're acting as a translator, right, of these risk and compliance requirements, into the business.
Yeah, and maybe again after today's insights, maybe we can be more helpful by translating it from central before it goes out to the pods and beyond.
Right, right. We've talked about the difficulty, and we think of the second line setting up our taxonomy, and whether it's process, risk control, even the org structure, but we've created our own separate language, which we needed to standardize, but it's still so far away from the language spoken by the business, by the revenue generators.
That's exactly right.
So
and I think Susan said earlier, a lot of time the first line, if you ask them what controls they're executing, they don't know what you're talking about. Yet they are executing controls every day. They just don't know that it's a control. So there's a long way to go, I think. And any help you guys have out there, we'd appreciate.
Well, this whole discussion of end user adoption, I think, hits home in many places. But so we've talked about the pods and how they're you're using human beings to drive the change and perform that translation service. But also Fannie Mae's done some great works around the executive scorecards, right, and the alignment of incentives. So can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we have at Fannie Mae, across the board, we're rolling out what we're calling the way of working. It's a lean management approach, and we are probably, 2 years into maybe a 5 or 6 year program, the way we're changing the way we manage the company. Part of that was to have what we call these strategic enablers and tactics, and without getting into what those are is exactly right. RiskWorks is one of the 21 tactics that Fannie Mae is executing upon to fulfill its mission. We talked earlier about how we link GRC to strategy. This is how we're doing it. We have the management committee on I think it's a monthly basis, reviews the metrics that RiskWorks is supposed to deliver, and sort of assesses the red, yellow, green of the program. And it's a place where the CRO, my boss, can say, we're yellow, and here's why, and I need, and how people ask, how can we help to solve that? And there's all these other tactics going on, and there's greens, yellows, reds, but the idea is, RiskWorks can only be successful with a cross-divisional, cross-line of defense acceptance and buy-in, and we have that forum at the executive level to raise up problems. Even the business themselves raises up problems with RiskWorks. They have that discussion, and we sort of get to resolution.
And does the executive committee consider those tactics? GRC is one of the 21 tactics. Are those just program initiatives, that are being closely monitored, or are they to become the way the business operates over time?
There's a variation, but yes, again, just because it's after 5 o'clock. The way of working, we call it WOW, that's the lean management. That happens to be a tactic as well. Originally, we thought of calling this GRC the way of risk management, but the acronym, for those of you who are still with me, wouldn't have worked out too well, the way of risk management. so we had to come up with something else, but that was but yes, there are many different tactics that will become the way of doing something.
Okay.
Others are shorter term, sort of maybe other technology implementations,
Okay.
such as HR
Okay,
or
great.
finance, that type of thing.
Okay. This is a great time for questions
Yeah.
around end user adoption. I know that, oh, I see a hand out there.
We should do a poll. Should we have called it the worm or not? I don't know.
Yep.
So I'm not quite, I'm sure I'm going to use the right terms, but are your business units, the adopters, the 1.5 level adopters, incentivized, or is there a performance based on that and their adoption?
It's a great question. I would say we are towards the left-hand side of the maturity curve on that at the present time. And again, to piggyback off the general from this morning on the normalization of deviance, this is something we've studied at Fannie Mae on, and we actually did a case study with HBS on the Columbia's final mission. Risk management is not sexy. It's not revenue generating. It's a cost center. That is the perception, and I'm sure we're not alone in that perception. So we are still fighting the good fight to make risk works, to make GRC stick. Now, although we are getting there, like I said, we have our issue management program down and it's working. There is still a long way to go, I think, for the value of GRC to be not only realized but also believed in. And I think we're still getting to that. Once we do get a little bit further, I think we can start ramping up the incentives. And the problem, frankly, today is if we have to be honest with ourselves and do a sort of a capacity and skills assessment of the first line. If we do push more and more, and I say as an industry, we push more and more responsibility down into the first line. Do they have the necessary bodies to perform those skills?
Yeah.
I might argue not yet. So to incentivize without enabling them to do it, I think is probably, we're a little bit sort of ahead of ourselves. But that's where we're heading, but we're not quite there yet, I would argue.
Great question, yeah. Thank you. So, Peter, the third topic we were going to address was just around the cultural changes, right? And, you have a GRC program strategy, and we've talked about, the technology being 10% of it, change management, training, program management, end-user adoption programs, that's the other 90%.
Yeah.
But, how are you driving culture change?
So, I think about culture as an oil tanker. You turn the wheel and it takes probably, I don't know, 100 miles or 3 hours for the boat to turn. For us, I think studies will tell you 7 years is the average time for a true culture change. We're probably in year 3. We have standardized issues, how people report issues, log issues. Our good friends in audit have recently started to turn off, they have, 531. We turned off the old manual process of asking for management to self-identify issues before an audit. Now they are just simply expected to do that, and if they do not, then in the audit itself, if audit finds an issue, it'll be an audit issue. Better that the business obviously raises the issue beforehand, logs it in MetricStream, and then audit consumes the issue. So I think we have carrots and sticks. So that's a stick, right? Audit stopped doing what it's. We gave people 9 months notice, so they knew it was coming. Yeah. The carrot's going to be, on the issue dashboard that we have every day, we're tracking MSIs by management committee member and by division. So they are a competitive bunch, I know that much. So when they start to see their ratio, the issue ratios that we've generated go down, the lower the ratio, the better, by the way, that they've generated more and more MSIs, they're raising their hand more and more, that's a good thing. So that's the carrot. The other sort of cultural pieces we look at changing are, what is the environment at Fannie Mae? Is the environment appropriate for the proactive risk culture that we want? And we're doing a lot of work with an outside firm, a change management expert firm. As we think about pulling various levers, one of the levers is that we're changing or trying to change. Historically, and I don't know for the rest of you, if you have raised an incident in the past, an operational incident, it was not viewed favorably. This is going back, years. But in pockets, it is still not viewed all that favorably by some. From a GRC perspective, I want to know about all the issues and all the incidents immediately upon discovery. Because the more data I have, the more I can allocate my resources more effectively to solve the problems for the company as a whole. We have a corporate reward system. Now, we're not sending money, but we are, maybe a little bit back to incentives. As soon as somebody raises an incident or an issue, we send it's called a shout-out or a thank you note. And we send it on behalf of sort of RiskWorks and the line manager and say, thank you for raising the issue. Thank you for raising the incident. You have helped Fannie Mae become more proactive, more risk-aware, blah, blah, blah. It's a very positive message. And that's just a simple lever we've changed. But somebody who was afraid to raise their hand and they see one of their colleagues got a thank you for so it's again, but that's going to take a lot of time to change, and there's going to be lots of other levers, and we have to have turn at the top and all this good stuff. But we have a roadmap of various other levers that we're looking at changing and pulling rather. But yeah, it's a long and complex journey, that's
right.
for sure.
Well, your first example, around, it was almost like the gamification of the metric,
right.
that ratio of self-identified to audit-identified issues. And, if people can see directional change in that metric, or which business has reduced it the most, or, and then, you create your own competition internally. But you think, with GRC metrics, there's almost infinite possibilities, right, in terms of, how well the risk assessments were performed or how often the control tests were done, right?
Absolutely, and as we approach, hopefully dynamic RCSAs or risk assessments that can live on, and I think again Susan mentioned this earlier, risk assessments that can be reassessed any time of the year by the risk owner. Yeah, we can track those metrics. We can see who's proactively assessing their risk, adding controls, taking controls away, and so on. You're right. The possibilities are endless, but it's just showing that.
Yeah.
And then
it's tough.
Multiplying it is difficult.
Yeah.
But,
and then, one of the things that you've had going on is, we've called it the pilot program, right? Where you look at, the complicated, you've been maintaining a repository of business process for a long time. And then, with the GRC system and all the work being integrated or linked to process, all these very interesting questions about the right level of process and where should we be doing our risk assessments, how many risk assessments should we be doing. But can you talk a little bit about how what do you guys mean about, in terms of it's basically a risk control matrix pilot, and, how is that work being performed and what are we learning in that?
Yeah, we learned an awful lot. We learned that getting a consolidated view across the three lines, standardized, aligned to our new standards, uploaded into MetricStream was an extremely valuable exercise. The results in terms of control rationalization and the move towards control optimization was epic. However, the time and cost it took us to get there and energy was not so great.
So can you step back and just define what you mean by control rationalization and control optimization?
So this is how I define it. I don't know if this is an industry perspective. But, so we have, for example, we did a pilot in the underwriting space. We had an RCM from internal audit. We had an RCM from the second line, an RCM that lived in the business. Compliance had an RCM, I think. We brought all those together, and turns out there were a lot of duplicates or controls that didn't even belong to that particular process. We renamed the process. So we started by truly understanding what the process was, the business process. Then we took out all the duplicate controls, any controls that didn't need to be there. So we had a rationalized set of controls. and some of them were called slightly different things for different people. So there was testing going on that maybe was being tested by more than one group. So we have now a clean RCM in terms of what are the risks, what are the controls. When I think about optimization, the next step for me is, well, what of that rationalized list, what can stop, what doesn't have to be performed, because we've got either compensating controls or an entity level control somewhere else that is capturing that. And I think only once you get a bunch of those RCMs together can you start to really focus on optimization.
So the rationalization is that first stage, just everyone looking at data they agree with, and naming conventions, process, risk, control, and then the optimization being where is it most important, right? Where should we be putting the resources?
But benefits in both. Even the documentation requirements that we've now managed to sort of eliminate from rationalizing, that's money. That's money saved, and resources, redeployed somewhere else.
And, do you mind giving just some ratios, not numbers of controls, but, when we're talking about the rationalization process, what was the reduction in controls that you, like 10%, 50%?
So I'm going to...
30%. Yeah, that's what I remember too. So that is significant, right? If you think about the head count, the hours involved, and the potential to redeploy resources, right?
But then the downside, again, like I say, it was a great result, but the level of effort that it took from both my team and the business was too much. And we were now reconsidering the approach of how can we leverage existing organic processes, whether that's the audit process, the RCSA process, the SOX walkthroughs. Is there anything else we can leverage that exists already that is nowhere near as burdensome,
right?
To get to the same result? And that's what I mean by, again, we've evolved. We're always changing. The team is always changing. We're always thinking about how we can make this easier for us, for the business. That's our current challenge. But we're working on that.
Yeah. Well, it's been, an amazing thing to watch, just in terms of, kind of the agreement that's been gained at the table around, process, and how we think about processes within a business. And then, what is the right level of process, if you're doing SOX work versus if you're doing a risk assessment. And then, just bringing to the table the fact that, there's a lot of different kinds of controls, and their experience with IT controls is different than financial controls, which is very different from operational controls in terms of our ability to to rationalize and optimize. So, it's probably one of the biggest benefits of GRC, but, it's also, very time intensive to do. So, okay, good. So, Peter, let's move on. Well, we're still open for questions. Let's move on to some of the success stories. So, you've established a GRC program office. You've got employees that recognize RiskWorks. You're branded, within the company. The board, you're having active, it sounds like very constructive discussions about GRC and, why is it working at Fannie Mae when it might not have worked at their respective organizations well. So let's talk about how you think about success. And I know, we've talked about anecdotal stories about, for example, the interaction model, between the first line of defense and internal audit,
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think one of the, my colleague from audit is here today, but I think the ability for talking in the same language as it relates to sort of issues and risks, rating on the same scale, and eventually having everything in one tool. The audit experience, I think, while we're probably on the precipice of it getting a lot more efficient very quickly. I think we've made small steps, but I think we're definitely, as we start to think about risks in the same way, we have consistent RCMs. We're about to get, I think about the tipping point. If we can get that data, audit can look at the tool first. The business unit is proactive, and I think that's where we are now. We're close. We're there with issues, like I mentioned.
Yeah.
We're already there, which is fantastic. And now the next step is risks. That will be the next success. Issues is the current success.
Yeah.
Risks is the next one.
Yeah. Okay, but you've made progress through the RCM work, right,
absolutely.
on the kind of agreement. You think about the overhead to the business of compliance having an RCM, risk having an RCM, audit having an RCM, and every quarter, they're whatever 6 months they get quizzed about it. Now the business sees you're all aligned, right? And you agree on what's most important, right? And then also, the issues. So it sounds like, kind of the anecdotal evidence is that, perhaps a relationship that may have been, tense has become, more harmonious, right? Or not, there's still an independent third line of defense operating, but, in agreement with the business and the other second line functions.
Yeah, and I don't know that anyone's ever going to love to be audited, whether harmonious is the right word, but I think I'm pitching less burdensome, a less burdensome oversight experience, and I don't just mean audit, I mean second line as well. I think as the first line, especially sort of in the new initiatives and pilot world, they like to move fast. They're talking to Airbnb, Uber, they're West Coast minded. They don't want this, but we're trying to be a strategic enabler for them. We're trying to give them an RCM and say, look, here's an RCM for all the pilots you ever want to do. Every time you do one, just tweak the rate, just reassess it, and let us have it, and we'll review it, and we'll be really quick. We'll be really quick with it and get back to you really quick. And they've got two things there. They've got us agreed and on board with the approach for their governance. And their speed to business or their, speed to market is way, way faster.
Right.
So they win by sort of aligning with us, and that's something we're piloting now with our pilot guys.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so it sounds like, a big improvement in that relationship between both the second and third line of defense and the first line. Also talk about, some of the success stories you've seen between the first line of defense people.
Yeah, I mean, what we are, again, we've seen pockets of this, but we're striving to give the first line autonomy in terms of resource allocation. We want to make sure that they have like I said earlier, we're incenting people to, or we're rewarding people who sort of raise their hand and log the issues, log the incidents. Once the business unit has a good idea of where the risk control gaps are, they can go fix the gaps without second or third line ever coming in. And again, we're starting to see pockets of that as the data gets populated. But again, small steps, but a large journey to go. But that's the idea. And then audit or second line just comes in and reviews,
right?
And just maybe does some testing or pushes testing back.
Okay, great. I think we have a question.
I'm not sure. Okay, this is working. Okay, good. So I had a quick question regarding looking at issue management and ratios between management identified versus audit identified. And I wanted to ask, from your experience, what behavioral changes, if any, have you seen so far resulting from looking at those ratios? And being that there's a sense of incentivization between which line is identifying, have there been any previously unforeseen opportunities that have been noticed from this new approach?
So it's very new. The information of the metrics is very new, and I'm going to probably say 4 to 6 weeks old. So the ratios themselves are brand new, and we're just beginning to socialize those. But you'll see Doug Watts, our chief audit exec. You'll see him tomorrow. I was talking to him about these ratios, and what we sort of looked at was, by business line, and then by issue rating. Now we have a 4-point rating scale. I think it's very low, medium, high. There is an interesting bias in the first line for self-identified issues to be low, and another interesting pattern, I'm not going to call it a bias maybe, in that the audit would raise more medium-rated issues, and also in the regulator would raise high-rated issues. So we're seeing things that maybe now we've seen them are pretty intuitive, but we didn't know they were there before. So we're measuring these ratios across time, across humans, across ratings. but you can bet that we will start to set targets on what we want to see from these and to drive that behavioral change. Would love it to happen organically. We'll see if that happens. But again, it's an oil tanker. We'll put the information out there, and then we'll start to see what happens. But I would say the next thing we want to measure is not just whether the business identified it or oversight or regulator identified it. It's how long before an audit or an exam it was identified. Because I think at the moment, Kirk, correct me if I'm wrong, audit is still sort of facilitating that management self-identified issue generation. Eventually, though, if we're going to be a true proactive, risk-aware culture, issues and incidents should just be going in any day, regardless of audit, regardless of FHFA exam. So that's the real challenge, and that's where the change management, the risk-aware, the culture change really comes in. It's a massively complex web, and when you think about the whole problem statement in one, it's a bit of a head spin. But if you go piece by piece, like we're trying to with these metrics and dashboards, it feels achievable.
And a metric like that, have you got agreement to report it to the board?
Not yet, but I want to. We're going again in November, and we promised them in March. That March was the last time we were going to do that big issue report using the old data. So if we don't go with something new and innovative in November, then we probably may have a pigeon. I do want to go in there with a falcon. So I think I'm hopeful I can get agreement to go in there with something to show for the ROI that they are going to get.
Okay, great. Oh, good. We have 2 questions over here. Great. Sure, I'll repeat. Of course, thanks.
So Fannie Mae, certainly a noble cause of affordable housing and being the backbone of America and the dream of housing. But you talked about metrics. Are you going to tie that to executive compensation as well? I think Franklin raised the $90 million that he got in salary during the crisis.
That still comes back to haunt you. 10 years later.
So the question was, are we going to tie risk metrics to executive compensation? That was the kind of the gist. So I mean, I would.
And there was a reminder about your executive pay scheme at Fannie Mae pre-financial crisis, right?
So I will preface this with I joined Fannie Mae post-crisis, 2011. The compensation structure of the executive team is vastly different from what it was in pre-crisis. So our CEO's salary is capped at $600,000. There is no bonus. There's nothing. That's what his salary is capped at. Other members of the executive team, nobody earns more than, I think it's $3 million. And again, if you compare and contrast that with other like institutions, Wall Street, Silicon Valley, whatever it is, we are, I think, in like the 5th to 6th percentile of corporate salary. So I don't think there's much more that can be done. But yes, they are compensated. Again, there's no bonus structure. They are just sort of fixed salary. But yes, they are not yet tied to these particular metrics, but they're very heavily restricted in certainly in what they get, and it is a risk-based approach.
Yeah, but it's definitely that quantification that Fannie Mae is driving to. That's the sense I get, right?
Not the question I was expecting.
No,
you're fine. That's interesting.
It's
but
a good one.
It's a very different culture than it was pre-crisis. Absolutely.
I think there was another question here, so we'll repeat it. So we'll repeat.
The question
was, did the control rationalization happen before or after creating your libraries?
Before, still before, because we actually were waiting for our M7 box to be stood up because we didn't want to load it in 6, we want to load it in 7. So yeah, the control rationalization was done all outside the tool. This goes back to it's not about the tool. You could do this in a spreadsheet and still realize the benefits. But yes, I think June 18th, I was promised. Starting June 18th, we're going to put it into the system itself, into M7, and then start to see what that can do for us.
Okay, good questions. Okay, I'm scanning around. So, Peter, just one more thing in terms of, kind of the success stories. We spent a little bit of time talking about, hard measures. We've talked about kind of anecdotal stories about relationships in the first line, relationships between the third line and first line. But, what are you envisioning, in terms of those hard measures, whether it's, around the pods and their behavior or around, measuring ROI, for the applications, the capabilities we've enabled at Fannie Mae? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I've already asked my team to start informally surveying the users of the new issue dashboard. Like, what did it used to take for you to get this information to your executive? And now what does it take? Because I know what it takes now, which is effectively, it's there live every day, every morning it's refreshed. But what did it used to take? And start to calculate the time saved by having it all standardized in one place and accessible by many people. So we're trying to track that, and then other metrics, as we talked about controls being rationalized. Eventually, controls being optimized. What can we stop doing? Who can we redeploy to do different things? Who don't we need to backfill? It's going to be it's not going to be any silver bullet, in terms of reduction. It's just going to be, we should get better and faster and more compliant. I think there's somebody earlier at one of the breakout groups, there was an example of a client who had 50% less issues in a particular area, and I was like, wow. Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago. And I was like, wow, they are so much further ahead than us, because right now I'm not trying to get less issues, I'm trying to get more issues. Because I want people to log them in the tool. Eventually, then we should be able to get better and get less issues. But right now I want more. I want them all. And then we can start allocating resources to fill those gaps and get rid of the issues. But Jason from who's our engagement partner at PwC, he brought across the concept of a metrics roadmap, and I think it's something that's a very interesting thing. We should be able to measure all sorts of different things when we get there, but some of those things we're just not there yet. So I think there's an evolution of metrics, just like there's an evolution of technology, governance, and my team. The last thing is the evolution of those metrics. So I got a bunch of stuff I want to measure. They're a couple of years away.
Right. But the important thing is you're laying out those roadmaps, whether it's around end user adoption, metrics, the control management process. It's all wonderful work. And Peter Bannister, we wanted to thank you on behalf of MetricStream for participating today.